As a dad of 3 young sons, I used to get this knot in my stomach every time one of my bubbly, chatty boys would just go silent. You know the silence I'm talking about, right? The kind that feels a little too heavy. My mind would just spiral. Are they mad at me? Did I say something weird at breakfast? Are they lonely? Did something happen at school? Every quiet moment felt like a blaring siren of parental failure. I mean, my job was to make sure they were happy, and happy kids are loud. They're messy and noisy and always asking questions. So, silence. That was a void. And every instinct I had screamed at me to fill it, to fix it, to make the noise come back. But one day, just totally exhausted from the constant worrying, instead of trying to pry the silence open, I did something completely different. I stopped talking. I just sat with it. I leaned into that quiet and I listened, not for words, but to the silence itself. And what I found on the other side wasn't an empty space at all. It was a secret world I never knew was there, a world that changed everything about how I see my sons, and honestly, how I see myself as a father. My big turning point wasn't some huge, dramatic event. It was a Tuesday afternoon. My middle son was on the floor, intensely focused on a single Lego piece, just turning it over and over in his hands. He'd been completely silent for almost an hour. Now the old me would have been on high alert. I would have knelt down, chirping, "What you building? Can I help? Do you want a snack?" I would have done anything to coax out a word, a response, any sign that he was still in there. But that day, I just resisted. I watched him. I watched the way his brow furrowed in concentration, the way his fingers methodically explored every edge of that little plastic block. There was no sadness on his face, no anger, just pure, unfiltered focus. And in that moment, it hit me. My panic wasn't about him at all. It was about me. My own fear was making me this loud, intrusive presence in his peaceful world. My need to fix his quiet was the real problem. So I took a breath and made a new choice. I chose curiosity over fear. I decided to stop being a detective, trying to solve the case of the quiet kid, and become more of an explorer, ready to map out this silent territory I'd just stumbled into. That shift from panic to patience felt like the ground moving beneath my feet. It was the moment I stopped parenting my own anxiety and actually started parenting the kid right in front of me. Once I started observing, instead of interrogating, this whole world started to open up. It wasn't empty, it was just running on a different frequency. I want to share the 3 biggest discoveries I made because they were the keys that unlocked absolutely everything. First, I found out that silence isn't emptiness, it's a full world. Our culture usually treats silence like a sign of disinterest, but for a lot of kids, it's the exact opposite. When they're quiet, it's often because they're more engaged than ever, just internally. Research actually shows that many quiet children have incredibly high levels of emotional intelligence, creativity, and empathy. Their minds aren't blank slates. They're bustling workshops where ideas are being built, observations are being processed, and feelings are being felt on a really deep level. I started to reframe it. My son isn't quiet, he's a deep thinker. Think about a babbling brook versus a deep well. The brook is charming, and you always know it's there. But the well has these cool, profound depths you can only appreciate if you stop and really peer into it. His silence wasn't a sign of disconnection. It was the sound of a rich inner world hard at work. The second discovery was a total game changer. There are different kinds of quiet. I learned that quiet children often fall into one of 3 main categories, or sometimes a mix. You have shy children who might take longer to warm up in social settings, but they get there on their own terms. Then you have introverted children who just don't need as much social stimulation. For them, big social events drain their energy, like an app running in the background of a phone. And then there are children with social anxiety who really want to connect, but are held back by a genuine, overwhelming fear. Realizing my middle son was mainly an introvert helped me understand what he needed. That quiet hour with the Lego wasn't sadness, it was him recharging his battery. A noisy school day had drained his social energy, and he needed that focused, solo time to feel centered again. It wasn't him rejecting me or the world. It was a basic act of self-care. Just calling all quiet a single problem is like saying all weather is just weather. Knowing the difference between a gentle rain of introversion and a hurricane of anxiety is everything if you want to give the right kind of support. And the third, most powerful discovery was that silence is a language. I'd been so focused on listening for words that I was completely deaf to all the other ways my boys were communicating. Kids speak volumes of their bodies. A slump in the shoulders after school can tell you way more than a one-word answer of fine. A relaxed body while reading a book is a clear sign of peace. That intense, focused gaze is a sign of deep engagement. My job wasn't to force them to speak my language, it was to become fluent in theirs. This meant paying attention to their nonverbal cues and responding to them. Instead of pushing for a conversation, I could just sit next to one of my sons and reflect what I saw. Wow, you look like you're really concentrating hard on that drawing. That simple act of observation, without demanding a reply, let him know I saw him, truly saw him, even in his silence. Okay, so making these discoveries was one thing, but actually putting them into practice was another. It meant I had to unlearn a lifetime of ideas about what good parenting and a successful kid looked like. So I came up with a new game plan for all three of my boys. First, I committed to being a door opener, not a crowbar. I realized that saying things like, "You're being too quiet," or "Why won't you talk to me?" was totally counterproductive. It just created shame and pressure, which made them retreat even more. Instead, I started using what some parenting experts call door openers. They're simple, inviting phrases that don't demand an answer, but create a space for one. Things like, "Tell me more about that," or "That's an interesting thought," or even just a simple, "Oh, really?" The trick was to say it with real curiosity, and then, this is the most important part, to just be quiet and wait. I'd put down my phone, turn away from my laptop, and give them my full, undivided attention. That showed them I wasn't just trying to get information. I was genuinely interested in their world whenever they felt like sharing it. Second, I learned to practice true active listening. This is more than just keeping your mouth shut. It's a real skill. It's about giving your child your full attention, making eye contact, and showing them you're taking in what they're saying. One of the best tools here is reflection. After one of my sons shared something, I would gently summarize it back to him. Like, "So, it sounds like you felt frustrated when your friend didn't want to play the game your way. This simple act does two amazing things. It confirms you understood them correctly, and more importantly, it validates their feelings. It sends the message, what you feel is real, and I hear you." That builds a foundation of trust that makes them feel safe enough to share more down the road. Finally, I became a guardian of their energy. I started seeing my son's need for alone time, not as a problem to be fixed, but as a core need to be respected. Just like I'd make sure they had enough to eat, I started making sure they had enough time to recharge. After a chaotic birthday party or a long school week, I'd proactively suggest some quiet time. "Hey, that was a lot of fun, but it was also a lot of noise. Do you want to go hang out in your room and read for a bit?" This wasn't a punishment, it was a prescription for their well-being. By honoring their natural rhythm, I was teaching them that their needs are valid and that it's smart to listen to their own body and mind. Now, I have to put a really big asterisk here. It is so important to make this distinction. Everything I've talked about is about understanding a child's fundamental temperament. But if your kid was always a chatterbox and has suddenly become quiet and withdrawn, that's a different story, and you need to pay close attention. A sudden, dramatic shift can be a red flag that something else is going on, maybe stress at school, bullying, a family issue, or even a traumatic event. In some cases, it can also be linked to things like sensory processing disorders, where a child gets overwhelmed by their surroundings and just shuts down. If your child's quietness is a new thing and it comes with other worrying signs, it's always the right move to talk to a pediatrician or a child psychologist. When I look back, I realized my fear of my son's quietness was really a fear that they wouldn't be ready for a world that seems to reward the loudest person in the room. But leaning into their silence taught me that their quiet nature isn't a weakness. It's a collection of superpowers. It's the power of deep observation, the power of rich creativity, the power of profound empathy, and the power of thoughtful self-awareness. When I look back, I realize my fear of my son's quietness was really a fear that they wouldn't be ready for a world that seems to reward the loudest person in the room. But leaning into their silence taught me that their quiet nature isn't a weakness. It's a collection of superpowers. It's the power of deep observation, the power of rich creativity, the power of profound empathy, and the power of thoughtful self-awareness. The silence was never my failure as a parent. It was an invitation. It was an invitation to slow down, to listen more deeply, and to connect with my sons on a much more real and authentic level. The goal of parenting isn't to mold our kids into a copy of ourselves, or into some version the world tells us is correct. The real goal is to provide the safety and understanding they need to become the truest version of themselves. Their silence isn't something you need to fix. It's something you get to explore, and the world you find in there is more beautiful than you can even imagine. If any of this hit home for you, I'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe and join our community here. I would genuinely love to read your stories in the comments below. What has your child's silence taught you? Thanks so much for watching.